So Joanne and I will sort of go back and forth, sort of as a conversation. So feel free to jump in whenever, Joanne, however you see fit. But I'll just start here. Our slow cooker meals are really a simple and hands-free way to cook. I'm pretty sure most of us are familiar with the technique and might very well have used it many times, or maybe not at all, and just sort of once in a while. But from here throughout the program, we're going to discuss a few of the fundamentals and how to have some simple, time-saving, healthy meal ideas. I'll go through some of the advantages and disadvantages of using the slow cooker, tips on how to use it, elaborate on some of the simplicity of using the slow cooker for meal planning, and showcase some healthy meals and review a few of the slow cooking safety precautions as well. So what are the benefits of slow cooking? If you've used one, you know one of the greatest things is essentially hands-free, but it also uses little electricity to cook. So, I love it in the summer as well as winter, because in the summer, you start your oven or your stove and the whole house heats up. So by just plugging in your slow cooker for maybe the meal that you're preparing, it's cheaper and it's safer than the oven. It's a great way to introduce cooking to maybe children or someone who isn't very familiar with cooking. No gas and electricity, very little electricity means there's less heat in the home, as I mentioned. And it's great for those summer days and winter as well, because sort of those hearty, warm meals kind of can be created as well to help sort of give you that, thought process throughout the day. If you're anything like me, I'm already thinking about dinner after breakfast. So, knowing something's cooking in the slow cooker kind of gets me through the day. It also is wonderful because it actually tenderizes some of those cheap cuts of meat. So tougher meats tend to be more flavorful. However, they need to be cooked properly in order to get that optimal taste. So the lower cooking temperatures for longer amounts of time helps soften and break down a lot of those, tougher bits of meat and, pieces throughout and the cartilage and such like that. So it actually helps give it a softer mouthfeel, and it's even better often than the oven. Certain cuts can even get tougher if you put them in the oven because of the type of heat that is conducted in there. With the slow cooker, you're often going to have some type of moist environment, so that helps those tenderizing those cuts as well. We can transform many of our cuts. Some of the tough cuts are your chuck roast, brisket, flank, any of those meats that you sort of you can't throw it on the grill and be done in 15 minutes. It's a cut of meat that really needs slow. You could throw a pork shoulder in there and it can go for 16 hours in a slow cooker. And, it can be essentially less expensive and very flavorful to do that. Although the slow cooker is running for a longer amount of time, it's still a small amount of electricity versus, putting it in the oven and doing something of, a similar application. So having it cook low and slow is really one of the better ways to help your tough meats get very tender and bring out all of those, umami type of meat flavors that come along with the longer cooking longer cooking times and the lower temperatures. So other ways to use your slow cooker is adding beans. The wonderful thing about the slow cooker is you don't need to pre-soak them. A lot of beans require, if you buy a bag of dried beans, you'll pre-soak them overnight and it takes hours. You have to sort through them, which, still you would do here. You'd sort through them and any legumes as well, but you can put them in the slow cooker with the appropriate amount of liquid, and they will be just as good once they're done, because that time that they would have been soaking is really sort of double duty in the slow cooker. So it's a huge time saver in that respect. A great way to add the beans to any vegetable-based protein and any meal. So, whether you want to be completely vegetarian meal and stick to, beans and legumes, or you can add beans into maybe your meat or something that you're going to be making, a chili or something along those lines in the slow cooker. It's also a great way to use the opportunity here to introduce some more Mediterranean types of dishes, and there's plenty of recipes out there that you can look up and see what you might need in order to do so. Slow cookers are also a healthy way to have meals. Sometimes we tend to think of let's just say, I mean, I think probably my first meal in a slow cooker was a beef stew of some sort, which is not necessarily unhealthy because the flavors are going to develop, but you'll have your, hearty potato and some carrots and onions and some good, vegetables that are very hearty. And because of the slow cooking process, it brings out so many flavors that you have to add very little fat. You do not need to have extra fats in order to get that same mouthfeel, because they're going to cook and roast essentially in a moist environment, allowing for a healthier meal. By doing so, this can provide many comfort foods that we have. I've even done slow cooking with, some types of pastas and things like that. You just have to, again, look for the right substitutions and look for the recipes that allow for the proper times, and whether it be high, medium, low, whatever it may be, and the amount of water that you would need in your slow cooker as well. It's very versatile. Not only is it those healthy, dinner meals, but you can make breakfast. I have done breakfast in my slow cooker as well with oatmeal, and I've done overnight oats where, cut up some apples, a little bit of cinnamon, water, milk, all of those things. And again, I looked up recipes to make sure I had the right ratios and let it cook overnight. And then in the morning, breakfast was served. I had a side of berries and we were done. You can even make some desserts, and even breads as well can bake in the slow cooker. The best thing about the slow cooker, I think, is it's so easy to clean up. Only the parts that get dirty are the inner cooking pot. And I often spray mine with some nonstick spray. So that really helps, because when you're using it for a really long period of time, some of those meats and even just some of the juices from whatever you're cooking will really adhere to the sides of the pot. But by having that spray there, it makes it for a much easier cleanup. And really, you're talking about one pot and a lid. Essentially, the outside of the whole slow cooker itself shouldn't get dirty, and the rest of it is just two pieces, and you can just soak them, in some soapy hot water, and once you wipe it out with a sponge, it's clean and ready to be put away. A lot of other, meals might need a saute pan, might need a different type of pot to boil water or whatever. You might need 2 or 3 different types of things to prepare essentially the same meal, but it has a different amount of cooking apparatuses as well as cooking time. So these longer cooking times, certainly dishes can take hours. That could be maybe, a downfall. It does take a while, but it allows for a lot of hands-free cooking. You want to get a soup going on a cold day. You want to actually, like I said, I did my oats overnight, so I was sleeping. It didn't even bother me. Or a lot of the slow cookers now have a feature to be able to set them. You can put your ingredients in and set it for so many hours on high. It drops to so many hours on low. It might then go down to the keep warm feature, and you can kind of come back to a delicious meal and maybe add any sides that you might need that weren't, in the main dish, and be ready to go within a couple minutes. It's also a great tool because it's very difficult to burn your food. Not that it's impossible, but it is difficult. By having such a low temperature and longer cooking times, it makes that difficulty, to burn the foods right there. But what you need to make sure you do, the way you can burn foods, is make sure there's liquid. If the liquid starts to evaporate and you're not having enough liquid to begin with, or moisture from the food itself, then you would need to make sure that there's something there to help conduct the heat, number one, and then also secondly, so it doesn't burn to the bottom of your slow cooker. Some meats, I can tell you, I have made that pork shoulder, as I mentioned, and we do, essentially pulled pork from it. And the only thing that goes into the slow cooker is the pork, but the pork has so much fatty material and tissue on it that it creates its own liquid. So sometimes you do have to be careful if you're going to do something like that. If you're adding liquids or any type of other foods in there, to be careful, because they will sometimes break down and create all the liquid, and you don't want the thing to overflow. So we're going to go over a little bit of the process on what to put in your slow cooker and how to properly layer things as well. Some of the disadvantages, as I said, I'm saying them that they're disadvantages. I don't really see them that way, but we might see them as a disadvantage. So I want to bring those to your attention as well. Food can often lack texture. Well, I'm not using my slow cooker every day. So the foods that I'm making in my slow cooker, I know are going to have a certain texture and have a different mouthfeel than others. Typically speaking, your food is not going to be crispy and crunchy because that's not the type of environment it's cooking in. You need more of a drier heat for that, and maybe a sear or something along those lines. But when you're using your slow cooker, it is going to be, as I mentioned, like a moist environment with tight, essentially a tight seal, because we don't want you lifting the lid, and your foods aren't going to have that same mouthfeel. I don't see that as a disadvantage because I just think that that comes down to planning. You're planning your meal. As it shows in this picture here, whatever we put in our slow cooker, as I mentioned, I do that pulled pork. We put pork in our, tacos, but we add mouthfeel and texture by our toppings. So you get some crispy lettuce. You might have some, here they use chickpeas or garbanzo beans. That gives it a little bit of a crunch. You might use some other fresh fruits and vegetables, things like that, that add that mouthfeel back into your dish. So you just have to know what you're really getting into, with whatever recipe you're creating. You also do need to plan ahead. So whether or not that's a disadvantage, sometimes I don't like to plan ahead. So I want the quick and dirty recipe, but oftentimes it's great. I even this past Sunday, I made a bolognese sauce with, all the meats and sauce and tomatoes and everything in the slow cooker because I knew I had 1,000 things to do, and I was able to just put it all in, let it cook up, and it just sat there and sat there and sat there for hours on low, and it was delicious by the time we ate. So it's really great to look into certain meal planning ideas. And I have even myself, the internet's a wonderful thing, looked up how to make certain things in the slow cooker that maybe you wouldn't normally. So again, you have to know what you're creating, because if you're looking for something crunchy and texturized, you're probably not going to get that out of the slow cooker. However, if it was something, like a bolognese sauce where I would normally do it on the stovetop for, a couple hours, 2-3 hours, I left it in for 5-6 hours, and it just got better and better as it sat there in the slow cooker. So as it mentions here at the bottom, it is not a 30-minute meal ideal. However, what it can be is the meal that you've prepared ahead of time. And then, for myself working, kids, husband, family that's coming over real quick or something, you have the main portion of the meal kind of cooking all day. And all you need is about 20 minutes, to prep everything else, and you're good to go. So, disadvantage, no, it doesn't take 30 minutes to make the whole meal, but it could essentially just save you a lot of time right at that dinner time hour. So you're ready to go. You're not going to get things that are golden brown, as I mentioned, with our moist environment. That needs more of a sear or a high heat to get that golden brown look and roast crunch. But that's okay. It's just a different type of food. We're not going to get the browning of our food, and we're going to know that, you have to do different things in order to get that. Instant pots are different, and they can be used in that way. And I also have one of those as well. However, I admit to use my slow cooker more often, but I do love my Instant Pot as well, because they're basically two different types of equipment, but you can use your Instant Pot, most of them anyway, depending on the brand. And mine is not actually Instant Pot brand. I don't even know which brand it is, but you can use them in a slow cooker manner. So if you're looking for one particular item, I just bought my niece one for Christmas because I said to her, the Instant Pot can actually do both. So she didn't have either one. And I said, well, then let's get you the Instant Pot, because she can use it as the pressure cooker that the Instant Pot is, but you can switch it and read the instructions on how to do so to make it more of a slow cooker. So if you don't have either of these, apparatuses at home, that might be an option as well. But I do have both, and I often use my slow cooker because it's just sort of in my nature to know. And because I'm gone for an all day, I know that it's okay, but I'll throw on the Instant Pot when I get home if I need something quick, even if it's in addition to my slow cooker meal for whatever the side was, rice or, pasta real quick or something like that. I use my Instant Pot for that as well. So how do these slow cookers work? They come in many, many different sizes. You have a 3-quart, a 6-quart, it's 8-quart. I think I saw a 10 or 11-quart recently. Round or oval, that's really your preference. I personally like the oval. I do have the round Instant Pot, so that's kind of why I kind of have the best of both worlds. There's many different options as well for the insert of the pot. You'll have ceramic or porcelain, maybe aluminum, it just depends on the brand and what they're creating. The lid typically is clear. They can come opaque or metal, but I like the clear because you can sort of see as some of those juices start to bubble up, and you'll know that it's coming to temperature without having to lift the lid. Oftentimes you'll have two, at least, at the very least, two temperatures, low and high, but often they're now putting on the warm, feature as well. So that if it's kind of already cooked, but you're not quite ready to eat yet, you throw it on the warm and it keeps things sort of warm and not getting completely cold. Many times I've had both the digital and the manual, just your preference. If you want to invest in a digital programmable, slow cooker, that way you can set it and just forget it. That's great. The manual, you would actually have to go over and turn the dial if you want to change the temperatures. And they can cost anywhere from $10 for a really small one to $300. I personally have a very large oval, I want to say it's about 8 quarts. It's huge. I think I got it for $30. So it wasn't even expensive for the large one. It just depends on what you're looking for. This is just the simple design of it. As I kept saying, about 3 pieces, just the inner pot, the heating coils on the inside. Be very careful as you're cleaning your slow cookers that the porcelain or the stoneware insert, if it's hot and you have now emptied it, do not put cold water in it. That will cause it, or could cause it, to crack. And I've also done that as well. I think I'm on my 6th slow cooker in my life. So, I've done all of it. I've had the good and the bad. And, just be careful that in that regard, that inner piece, you really shouldn't run cold water on any of your apparatuses and cooking needs, that the cold immediately hitting the hot will cause some issues. Very easy to use, as I've mentioned. The heat is controlled from the front dial of the slow cooker, and that glass cover really helps you be able to see what's going on. And, you're all set and ready to cook a wonderfully healthy meal. A lot of our slow cookers vary in temperature as well. So, you need to make sure that you're looking up the item that you have. If it's really old, that might also alter some of the heating element and cause, cooking times to change. But generally speaking, a large pot roast, about 6 to 7 pounds, might take, almost 10 hours on low, or a little over 7 for, a high cook time, because a pot roast tends to be very tough and you want it to kind of get that nice stringy, soft, meat once it's complete. So fish, very quickly, could only take a couple hours, maybe an hour and a half, depending on what type of fish it is. And again, with all of these cuts of meats and all of these items, you need to really know what you're creating, what type of meat and meal you're going to come from it. And that will help determine the amount of time as well. So follow your recipes and look up what would be the appropriate time and the heat for your particular slow cooker. Excuse me for a minute. So filling your slow cooker pot just right. You do not want it to be lower than halfway full. So that brings me back to the previous slide about the different sizes. So if whatever you're making is not going to be very much, maybe just, I've done baked beans in my slow cooker, maybe, 2 cans of beans, and you just really want to heat them up, and I doctor mine up and keep them in there so all the flavors meld together, that you're going to use maybe a smaller slow cooker. You don't want to get out the big giant one, because it's just basically going to be at the bottom, and that can easily burn as well, because, or not burn, but get that very dried out flavor. So you want to make sure that you're filling it at least halfway or more, but no more than 2/3 of the way up, because you need to allow for some expansion. You need to allow for some of the juices, as I mentioned earlier, depending on what you're cooking, might sort of create a little liquid on its own. And you don't want the food to heat unevenly. You want things to have enough room to sort of let the air circulate. And as you're going to go in very sporadically and mix your food up, then you will need to have room to do that as well. So filling it in the right order is critical. Making sure the bottom layer is typically your harder root vegetables. If you're not making vegetables, then it can be your meat. But if you have potatoes or carrots or, parsnips or something that's sort of the really tough vegetables, you want to have them on that bottom layer because they tend to take longer to cook than our meats. So having them closest to that heating element will help them cook faster or at the same rate essentially as your meat that's going to layer right on top. You're going to put your layer of meat right on top, and then maybe some vegetables that aren't as hearty. If you're going to throw in maybe an onion or something of that sort, you would put that over top, and then your liquid can go on top of it all. So you want to make sure when you're using liquids, if it's not a specific thing, really try to use low sodium broths or sauces, because that really is important to have less sodium in your diet. And really our foods are going to start to absorb some of that as well. So we don't want to have all the extra sodium in there. So healthy meal planning when it comes to a slow cooker, as I mentioned, limit your sodium. Trying to use less sodium, not adding, you really don't need as much salt. Salt can be a tenderizer as well, but we're using the slow cooker as our tenderizer. So we don't really need to over salt things. You might here and there have a sauce or something of the sort that has some sodium in there, which is fine. But as I mentioned, please, try looking for some low sodium broths and using very limited or not at all like soy sauces that are very high in sodium as well. So we want to vary our vegetables, add a variety of vegetables, a variety of color. Adding, different colors to our meal allows for not only a vibrant meal, but actually gives you more nutrition. The more colorful your diet, the more nutritious your diet is, because every color of our foods adds different textures, different flavors, and different nutrients as well. So it's important to make sure we have a very colorful diet. If you're using the slow cooker for your vegetables, not only, as I mentioned, putting it like an onion on top, but even the more delicate vegetables you would put in either at the end of the process or, maybe halfway through, depending on what it is, because you don't want, you're not going to put broccoli in at the same time you've put in potatoes, because potatoes are going to take much longer. But you might want to add broccoli, 3/4 of the way through, or maybe just at the last, 20 minutes because you like it a little bit crunchy. So really you have to know which vegetables you're using and think about, how much time is it really, if you're adding peas to the dish, that does not take time at all, to heat up and get cooked through. So, that might be a last couple of minutes, maybe a half hour, depending on the item that you're creating. And you want to make sure that you're varying those vegetables and putting them in at the appropriate times. Try to explore some of our grains, making quarter of your plate grains, and half of which should be whole grains. So those grains would be, brown rice and, farro and quinoa, bulgur, barley. You can find a multitude of different grains, even legumes, which, is more of a protein, but you can throw those in there as sort of a filler, and have them cooking along with your food item. But make sure if you're adding certain things, I know I have bought farro that's also a fast cook and also a slow cook. So make sure you're adding whichever one you're purchasing at the appropriate time, because if it's a fast cook and you put it in there too early, it's just going to end up to be mush. If you want it to retain its texture and its, mouthfeel, put it in a little bit later. And again, as I mentioned, make sure you're checking your recipes and looking it up. I mean, the internet is a wonderful thing, and you can look up almost everything at this point. So protein, it really should be lean. We should have about a quarter of our plate also of protein, and we're looking for meats that have very little fat, fish that's lean in fat, beans, legumes, or nuts if you're going with a meatless meal, or just as an addition to. Consider mixing it up between plant and animal sources. It's better for you health-wise and also better for our planet. Try to make sure your portions won't leave you uncomfortably full. We all joke around the holidays and, Thanksgiving, oh, we're so full, you sit back, you can't stuff another thing in. You really shouldn't be that full when you're eating. This picture here shows you that half your plate should be fruits and vegetables, not only for the colorful nutrition of those items, but also they give you a lot of good fiber that helps with digestion as well. And the grains also give you fiber and a lot of other nutrients and your proteins. And even if you have, maybe a side of milk or have your dairy at some other item of your day, or, you're using maybe low-fat yogurt or low-fat sour cream as, in addition to the item that you've made, So just try to make sure as you're eating, you're comfortably full. You can still move about your day and feel that, and the energy you've just given yourself to use, that fuel gives you the energy to get throughout the day, not to make you feel as if you can't do anything. If you're so tired after you eat that you can't move, that's uncomfortably full and too much of a meal. Fresh, frozen, or canned? This is often a question we get, pretty much all throughout the year, whether we're discussing slow cookers or not. But fresh is always great when it's in season. If you can get some fresh fruits and vegetables from your local farmer's market or even the food store, if you can look for Jersey Fresh, that way it's really local. Those are wonderful. However, we don't grow everything all the time. So frozen can be an option, which is wonderful. And sometimes even best for maybe a slow cooking meal, depending on what you're making, because of the peak season that they're frozen at. You could also use canned fruits and vegetables. They tend to be a little bit softer because they've been sitting in the can. So you would put them in at different times, but always try to look for the low sodium option or packed in water, or if it's a fruit, that it's like packed in juice or water, not high fructose corn syrup. So why would we choose frozen? Well, actually, as I mentioned, frozen fruits and vegetables are picked at their peak point of freshness. So it is exactly the time that they are ripe and they are delicious and have the most nutrients and the most flavor and the most mouthfeel. When you buy fresh produce, you might sometimes think, oh, this is a wonderful item, to purchase at the food store, and it's fresh, so it must be best, which I'm not saying it's not. It just might have been shipped from a farm and traveled a longer distance. So it may not have the same mouthfeel, texture, taste as a frozen item. I always like to bring up peas. If you've ever noticed in the food store, there's often only a small window where string beans, peas are all offered fresh, because they actually have a shorter window for that picking season, but yet you can buy frozen peas all year round. And frozen peas are picked at peak season and they are flash frozen so that they give you all the same nutrients and taste, but yet they last because they're frozen. So, sometimes it's great to buy the fresh, but when in doubt, if you cannot get fresh and not know, how long they've been shipped, because you can mostly see on almost all our produce where it's from, might come from a different country, which means it's even traveled longer, then you can go for frozen if you can. As I was mentioned, the freezing process, they will take fruits and vegetables and blanch them in hot water or steam to kill any bacteria and preserve the nutrients really fast. And then they flash freeze them. So that's why, your peas, they generally, you might have a clump of frozen peas, but you generally have a lot of loose peas because they're flash frozen really quick to preserve that freshness. And then they're bagged up and kept frozen so that we can purchase them and have them, for their peak freshness and peak flavor. So our safety precautions, as I was mentioning, start with a clean space. Make sure your cooker is clean, the utensils, your work area. You want to make sure your hands are clean. Keep your perishable foods refrigerated until time for preparation. Don't just leave them sitting on the counter because, you're going to use them later. Keep them refrigerated until it's time. If bacteria, if we're putting chicken into our cooker and the bacteria from the chicken splashes onto your perishable items and they're sitting at room temperature, bacteria will multiply quite rapidly, and you might not even think that just a quick rinse, it doesn't necessarily get rid of that bacteria. So we really try to keep those foods separate. Always thaw out your ingredients as well. If you're taking meat or poultry out of the freezer, make sure you thaw it in the refrigerator prior to putting it in the slow cooker. This makes for the proper temperatures for it to come up to a full cook and get to the right temperature to kill any bacteria that might be within that item, and also help it cook more evenly. Make sure, some of your foods, as I mentioned, are going to need some type of moisture in order to cook in the slow cooker, but some of the best foods in the slow cooker are things like chili, soups, stews, as I was telling you earlier. And thawing ensures that the item will cook all the way through. It will be difficult to know whether the internal temperature of your chicken that is a giant breast is the right temperature, because you're going to have to lift the lid, you're going to have to stick a thermometer in there, you're going to have to check it, and that changes the temperature of the whole pot that you're cooking. So we want to make sure that the best way, you still may have to check the temperature, but it may be quicker if you can have it thawed before, put the item in, let it cook, and then at the very end, just check the temperature, and then you'll be good to go. As I said, pay attention to your temperature. Slow cooking really must reach a bacteria killing temperature, and I'll go through that in a moment. Start your cooker on the highest temperature for at least an hour if you can, and then switch it to low for the longer cooking. This way it ensures, you know, I don't want to say a rapid jump to the highest temperature, but at least a faster jump to the highest temperature. As you can see in this picture, this particular slow cooker has a thermometer that goes through the lid. It's a sort of a sealed hole, and then it goes into the meat itself so that you can sort of check the temperature throughout the cooking time. If for some reason your power has gone out and you're really not sure, you do need to throw out the food. Nobody likes to hear me say that, but when in doubt, you must throw it out, because you will not know whether or not the food item has allowed enough time for bacteria to grow, and you can get very ill from a foodborne illness. So these temperatures, as I was mentioning earlier, we have the danger zone. The danger zone is between 40 degrees and 140 degrees, and that's where bacteria likes to grow the best. So, you know, if things are in the freezer, try to always keep your freezer below 0 and your refrigerator below 40 degrees. They should keep bacteria from growing within those times. But again, there's always times where we need to remember, as we're opening and closing the refrigerator, you know, temperatures are fluctuating. So while you're cooking that item, make sure it reaches the proper temperatures that you see along the side here, depending on which item you're creating and cooking. So just be sure that you're cooking your food to the proper temperatures. The slow cooker should be 2/3 of the way full, as I mentioned earlier, to ensure your food is cooked thoroughly, and do not overstuff it. If you're bringing it way up to the top, it's not going to allow for the proper food and temperatures to come around all of the food items. If you have a large cut of meat, try to cut it into some smaller pieces so that it cooks thoroughly. And, you know, if it's just too many vegetables, maybe, you know, start with a few of, you know, maybe a handful of each type of vegetable and see where it goes from there. And then that would be a lesson to know, you know what, if I'm going to be making large meals like this, I might need a larger slow cooker in order to do so. Keeping the lid on while the food is cooking is also critical. It really must retain the same heat throughout the cooking process to make sure that all of the items are cooking and heating up properly. So by taking on and off the lid, it allows a lot of heat to escape. We know, we've all done it. You lift the lid and all the steam comes out. So you really, really, really only want to lift the lid when you might need to stir something or check for the proper cooking process and that something is complete. You might have to insert a thermometer or something along those lines, but that's why I really like that glass lid, because you can really start to see if the liquid, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, is coming to, you know, it's really not going to boil, but you'll see some bubbles going, you know, it's getting quite warm. And then that way you'll know a lot of the heat is circulating throughout. But if you do need to lift it, make it a quick, you know, little peak, stir, and then close it back down as fast as you can. Leftovers. Slow cookers are great for leftovers or a meal prep ahead of time. So maybe it's not a leftover yet, but you're just prepping ahead of time. So try to refrigerate your leftovers or your meal within 2 hours. This way, we say 2 hours because the bacteria doesn't have enough time to multiply if it wasn't fully cooked off. So this way we're getting it into the refrigerator to reduce the risk of food poisoning. If you can, use a shallow container. Don't just stack it all in a large container because it takes a lot longer for items to cool and come to the refrigerated temperature if it's got a thicker center. So you really would like lower, shallow containers. That's the best to let things cool, and you can put them directly in the refrigerator. You do not need to let them cool on the counter. Never reheat your leftovers in the slow cooker as well. If you need to reheat them, do them either in the microwave or, you know, if it's a sauce or something, you do it on the stove top, because the slow cooker won't come to a high enough temperature at that point to, you know, kill any bacteria or things like that. So if you're going to reheat any leftovers, then put them in the microwave and have them, you know, heated that way, or another source, because the slow cooker is not the best for reheating. Hopefully, and I hope everybody has a great week, or I guess month at this point. But you can always go to our website for other programs as well that are going on. You know, a bunch of different departments, and our department itself are offering different things different times of the month. So, you know, check it out, and hope to see you next month.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.